Thank you all for being here today. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Darcy Paiva. I'm the co-chair of the Easton Wings of Hope Steering Committee, and I'm the executive director of the Easton YMCA. So I just want to thank Easton Public Schools for the space and the support, and especially Easton Wings of Hope. So Easton Wings of Hope is a youth substance abuse prevention coalition in town, and especially the program coordinator, Tevin, and our community outreach director, Kelly, for putting in all of the work into this. And our panelists as well that are going to be introducing themselves in just a second. So the purpose of the event is to help community members understand what's happening in our society as it relates to youth substance abuse and mental health. So we want to approach this topic from a perspective of hope and concern. We know that most youth are not using, and we want to better understand what the concerns are that are on the rise, and then the resources that are available for them. So the goal of the event is really to provide valuable, hopeful information to all of you to prevent the onset and continuation of substance use and mental health disparities. So we've asked a group of these lovely panelists here just to participate in some organic conversation based on their level of expertise and their comfort levels. So I'm going to hand it over to our panelists to introduce themselves and let you know a little bit about themselves. I'll start with you, Chris.
Hi, my name's Chris Aker. I'm the school resource officer for the town of Easton. Been a police officer for 20 years. Yeah, that's me.
Short and sweet.
Short and sweet, yeah. I'm Stephanie Contav. I'm the community mental health liaison for the town of Easton. So I'm a clinician essentially that's employed for the town. I work a couple days a week with a community outreach police officer. And I work, basically I get referrals from all assets of town, whether it's police, fire, schools, community members, when they're looking for help for their loved one, themselves, and any type of mental health, substance abuse, those kind of situations. Prior to coming here, I worked for the state for 24 years between Department of Children and Families and Department of Mental Health.
Awesome, thank you. Marcy?
I'm Marcy Dacamara. I'm the executive director of Be Inspired Counseling. We are a private group practice based out of Stoughton and Mansfield and telehealth. I've been in the field for 25 years, and we treat ages 5 through adult, but mainly right now we're seeing the teens and tweens, pretty much our main, and the transitional age youth.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Patton. I am a parent here in Easton of a middle school kid, and I sit on Wings of Hope. I'm one of the founding members, I guess. I also professionally am the prevention coordinator for the town of Stoughton, so I kind of do what Kelly does for Easton. For the town of Stoughton, I work for the municipality. I've been in that role for quite some time. I've been in the field for over 20 years too, so I guess we're like a fairly mature, experienced panel.
I like that.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. So how tonight is going to work. So we have 3 questions that we are going to ask our panelists. But what we would love for you to do is if you have your own questions, if you're looking for some perspective or comments, expertise on anything, you have note cards in front of you that you are welcome to write down a question. After we get through the 3 main questions, we will go through those cards and we will ask away. So, okay. All right. So our first question tonight, what do you think is the most concerning thing happening in regard to youth substance use and mental health? And what do you think is the most hopeful thing? I'll kick it off with Stephanie.
All right. Okay. I guess I'm going to set the big context. So when I think about youth substance use, which I have to do every day for my job, the biggest, I think, headline for me is that most adolescents don't use alcohol or other drugs, which is actually really hopeful and sometimes surprising to people, and some do. It's really hard to predict who the some might be. And so I think it's really important for all of us as parents, as folks who work in the community, who work with young people, to really be thinking about all of the things we can do to delay that first use and really push that off as long as possible. But I think it's really important to be having those conversations in the context of most kids are not using. And so I think that's really, really important and super hopeful. And all of the data really suggests that all of those numbers are actually trending down. So less kids today are drinking, less are vaping, less are using marijuana, less are using all of the other things. That's great news. I think for me, one of the things that's concerning and that we have been talking a lot about in my own community, in Easton and other places, is what the use looks like for our adolescents who are using. And so even though the numbers of kids who are initiating use are down, and that is a great thing, and I think some of that is connected to COVID, so maybe something positive that came out of that. The kids who are using, some of them are using in ways and at rates that are more significant than previously. So an example of that might be, of the kiddos who are using cannabis products, the ones who are who are using more than just sort of casually and experimenting, are using in a way that is, really at sort of the high end of use. So multiple days a month, like, significant amounts of product. The products look really different than they used to. So I think that's also something that's concerning, just some of the things that are out there that kids can sort of get caught up in. And so I think, it's sort of holding both of those truths at the same time. Like, great news, use is down, and we still need to be concerned and vigilant, and we need to be having conversations with our young people. So I think that's sort of those are the two things I think about when I think about hope and concern in this topic.
Thank you, Steph. Does anyone have anything else to add?
I can go. So a lot of what we see on the concern side is that a lot of youth are using substances as a way to self-medicate because they're not having access to psychotropic medication or other interventions that would help them cope better with the situation. And sometimes it's just because their families aren't in support of them going to get it. Sometimes it's just they're not available. As we know, there's a medication shortage. So that's something that we see a lot that is a concern. But the hope is that we see a ton of teens who are coming in and talking about their mental health, and teens who are asking to come in, and teens who are referring their friends to us. So anytime a teenager refers their friend, that says a lot, rather than the parent calling. It's, my kid's friend gave me the number. And, the stigma amongst the youth of mental health is decreasing a lot. So that's definitely a hope for us.
That's wonderful to hear. Yeah.
That was going to be my thoughts. No, that's okay. That was going to be my thoughts on the hopefulness piece too, is that I think younger generations are much more open to talk about their mental health. It's more normalized too. It's just as much as physical health, other kind of things. So I see that in youth. They've kind of bought on to it's okay to not be okay, and being able to share that with their friends, get help for their friends if their friends say something. So I think that, even just from my generation down, is that's shifted quite a bit, that the stigma around that, I think sometimes the concerns can come in, say, with family members or other people in their lives that maybe don't share that view. But I think amongst their peers, they're able to talk about it differently, and it's more normalized to talk about it. Some of the concerns, I think, just accessibility to things that kids can get, and how normalized that is for them. They don't think vaping, all these things are a big deal or have a lot of long-term consequences to their health. So that kind of concerns me. In my role, I tend to see more of youth that are struggling with their mental health or substance use. So it's hopeful for me to hear the bigger picture that a lot of kids aren't. It's just what I get referred to me is the kids that are a lot of times. So I think that's great to hear, and hearing that the things are trending down. It's just the kids who are having some issues or struggling with some of these things is the harder ones to kind of tackle and get to a point where we can reach them to listen to something differently. So my thoughts. Anything, Chris?
Yeah. I think that, so from my perspective, it's at the high school level, to a much lesser extent, the middle school level, the kids that are vaping, it's basically the same group of kids. It's not everybody. So what do you do with that group of kids, and how do you address that group of kids, right? Another interesting thing about the THC is the cannabinoid receptors are very similar to the same receptors that are in opioids, right? They're kind of the same shape, so they kind of stick to your brain the same way. And with a teenage brain, because they're not developed, the last part develops the frontal cortex, right? And that's the front part is the part that does your reasoning, your thinking, all that. The part that drives a child's brain is the reward center, right? I used to talk to kids at the middle school, and I would do this experiment, and I would ask questions, and none of the kids would raise their hands, right? And then some kid would finally say, ask a question, and then I would give that kid a lollipop. When I asked the second question, how many hands went up? Right? Because they want the reward. Mm-hmm. And with at least with the THC, nicotine to a lesser extent, but when they get into the THC vaping, they're getting that reward right away. And that's kind of what they're latching onto, and they're not thinking about the long-term consequences. So that's kind of the negative aspect of that. The positives have already been brought up. I mean, it's not a lot of kids from what I'm seeing. And the other thing too, I was at a conference today in Norwood for school resource officers, and one of the topics that came up was it had to do with social media, and I know we're not talking about that, but the data is kind of the same. The more the parents are involved with the kids, the less problem they have in those areas, right? So if you're involved and you're like, no, this is not acceptable, and they know it's not acceptable, they're less likely to engage in it, right? So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. I think that was great, where there is some concern. The fact that we know that not all youth are using is hopeful, right? Mm-hmm. And I think each of you just shared some sentiment of that. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. All right, so our second question. So from your perspective, how do you see substance use and mental health overlapping in connection to youth? I don't know who wants to start. How do you, yep, go ahead.
I can see that they're interconnected, I guess, in my experience when working, in the sense that if kids are struggling with some mental health symptoms, then I think it's easier for them to turn to self-medicating if other things aren't available, right? So if they're not maybe getting enough support other places, or feeling frustrated but not being heard, or in their perception not being heard, I think that, and that continues for a while, say anxiety, depression, anything like that, then, they could be then turning to something that's going to help feel good and have that be reinforced when they're using it. I think when it comes to mental health, there's things that have factored into making it. I think I read today that 1 in 8 kids are suffering from anxiety, and that's been pretty stable, but it's been even more so like post-COVID. So when you think about that, the amount of kids that are struggling with some of these things, and if they have other things factoring into their lives, or if they're not, they're trying to help figure out how to manage it themselves. And so if they're exposed to it, or someone else offers, or something like that, it can become a slippery slope of being able to self-medicate. I mean, we know this even with adults. So I think that's part of the connection of how they could kind of lap over. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but
yeah,
that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else?
I think the only thing I would add to that, because I would have said exactly that, is like the self-esteem piece. So if they're out and are socializing and their peers are using the peer pressure piece to try to fit in, and the experimentation and what that does to their mental health, if they are doing what the group is doing, or if they're able to stand up for themselves and walk away, I think that very much also can play into their self-perception, and then, kind of, well, so-and-so didn't use, and then what's kind of the follow-up the next day in school and things like that, and how that can affect their mental health.
I think one of the things to keep in mind when a kid's self-medicating to whether to deal with anxiety or depression, they feel better, right? And then when they don't use, they feel worse than they did when they started. So it's sort of this cycle of, okay, now I have to use, and then this and that. And they eventually, it could lead to other drug usage. I know we don't like to talk about gateway drugs and all that, so I'm not going to get into that conversation, but it can happen because that's no longer giving the elicited response that they want. So they may try something else. So that's just something to just to consider.
Yeah, I get to listen to a lot of people who are smarter than me, and and so like lately I had the privilege of being able to spend some time with Dr. Randy Schuster, who's an addiction medicine research doc at Mass General, and so I'm like borrowing, stealing some of the things that she says because I think it sort of encapsulates a lot of what you all were saying, and so she talks about when we think about adolescence, there are kind of two types of use. There's impulsive use, which is I'm at a party, something is available, I open the medicine cabinet, I open my parents' liquor cabinet, something is there. The adolescent brain is kind of like, it's like a race car where the brakes aren't fully developed yet. Like the gas pedal is good, like, that reward system, it is like full on. So making impulsive decisions in settings where things are available or their peers are doing it or they're curious. The products look, if you had a chance to see some of the things that are hidden in plain sight, the products are, I believe, really marketed to kids. I mean, they are very appealing. They're packaged and flavored like candy. So that's sort of that impulsive use, which for sometimes like that's the beginning and the end of it for kids. That happens. Might happen a couple times, it doesn't happen anymore. And then there's sort of that more compulsive use, which you also heard people talking about, where the substance use is sort of taking care of something else. It starts to become, because that's sort of how drugs work, right? They do in the moment, they make people feel better. And so, and then they don't, and then as adults, we know that. And we can sort of see that the long-term impact of that or the withdrawal or some of these other pieces, but kids don't necessarily see that. And some of the things that they have access to, like the nicotine products, the vaping things where you could vape all day long if you wanted to and just be getting an insane amount of nicotine, very addictive, very quickly. The high potency, almost all THC, all cannabis products for the most part are high potency at this point. Anything higher than 10% is considered high potency by the researchers, and it's almost impossible to find anything below 10%. The stuff that kids are using, edibles and stuff, are like 70-80% THC. I mean, they're like, we actually don't even really know that. Like, I've had researchers say to me, if anybody tells you they know what the long-term effects are of those products, they are lying to you. There has not been enough time. We really don't know. It doesn't look great, but we don't know. And so, I think I think that the substance use and the mental health are, in some ways, they feed each other. They're kind of bidirectional. Like, if a kid is struggling with some stuff that's going on, they might use substances to feel better. It becomes self-reinforcing. We know that substances, in some cases, can exacerbate or set kids up for mental health issues. But the truth is that, in some ways, it doesn't entirely matter that much, because when you have a kid in front of you, we want to be thinking about the whole kid. And so the other thing that Dr. Schuster says that I think is really brilliant and I think is a really good mental image for people to keep in mind is that for kids who are particularly using compulsively, who are like using in a way that is problematic for them, that the substance use is the smoke, it's not the fire. And so we have to figure out like what is going on for that kid, like what is causing them, what is making that use happen, and we need to deal with the fire. Otherwise, we're literally just blowing smoke. Like if we only deal with the vaping and we're sort of zeroed in on that and we aren't having a conversation with the kid about what else might be going on, we aren't really considering the whole child. And so, I think that the smoke and fire analogy is really, really useful. It also gives us sort of an empathetic way in to be thinking about and being curious about like what else is happening here. Like this is the use is doing something for this kid. It might be maladaptive, right? But it's doing something. And so I think to be thinking about, what other coping things might not be in place, what might be missing, what's really painful. So to be thinking about those pieces. But the other thing that I think is related to mental health is just the idea that the adolescent brain, and like Chris mentioned this too, is developing until kids are, now they're saying at least 25, like at least 25. And so that means all that frontal lobe stuff that is like so important for like decision making, executive function, thinking ahead, is just, it's growing and developing. Like, you know, that's one of the things that's like really cool about the adolescent brain. It's like amazing. And it is, you know, a dangerous place for drugs and alcohol to be, because it impacts kids in a really different way. And so one of the best things we can do for our kids is delay that first use of any of those substances as long as possible. Like, let the brain do its thing. If kids, when they're adults, want to use products that are legal in society, like the way alcohol affects me is not the same way it's going to affect my 13-year-old. And, you know, if I were to vape or, you know, use marijuana, it's not going to affect my brain the same way it would affect an adolescent. And so I think that's also really important to keep in mind. Like, the further, and that's like something we can do as parents, the more we can delay that first use, the less problematic things can happen. It doesn't mean problems don't happen for adults, but you know, the risk for kids become significantly lower the more we let their brain do its thing. So I think that's also really important.
I think that's great. I love that analogy, and I think too with our coalition, what I do love about it is that we don't use scare tactics. We just educate and allow them to make those decisions. I think that there's other coalitions and groups out there that use different you know, techniques and everything, but I think you nailed just delaying it and educating the kids and families. So thank you. All right, so last question, and then we're going to get to yours. So if you haven't written one down yet, please do. What is one step people could take to deepen their understanding regarding these issues, and who can people connect with if they have questions or concerns? Besides all four of you.
Right, yeah, besides us. I'll start this one, I guess. So when I'm dealing with a kid in school, basically the person I reach out to on the outside is Stephanie through my counterpart, Officer LeCount, the community outreach officer. And when they deal with a kid, they'll come to me. So we really do work sort of hand in hand on these types of issues. I also work with the counselors, the school counselors. They may, hey, can you talk to Stephanie about this? Yep, sure thing. And that's just how we do it. It's a whole community approach. I'm not trying to. The last thing that I want to do is charge a kid with any crime. Just so you guys are aware, that's not my job. I will if I have to, but I try not to, right? But it's to work with all of the stakeholders to try to find the answer that's going to work best. Because I'm not going to have all the answers. Stephanie might not have all the answers, but Stephanie, me, and somebody else, maybe we can come up with an answer. And that's kind of the goal that we're looking for.
I guess to piggyback off that, I would say if you have youth that your youth or you're worried about, or friends, other parents that you know that their child, I would start with the school, right? I would go to the school and maybe talk to the guidance counselor if you're concerned about your child, primary care doctor, going to them to kind of express some of the concerns, see what resources they have. I'll boost myself with the outreach department here within the town. I mean, we have a wealth of resources and connections made with lots of treatment centers, lots of different places that we can connect people to. But I would try to start with who your child is exposed to, I guess, who they already feel comfortable with, maybe trust, and start there, and then maybe try to get referrals for therapy, for treatment, that kind of stuff, or whatever other people might be seeing, because what you might be seeing at home could be very different than what the school's seeing, than what if they go into their pediatrician and talk to their doctor about privately or something like that. So again, that community sense of being like, I'm concerned about this. And I think, my experience with the schools here and everybody that I've worked with, they've seen it all before. They know your child. They know how to help answer some of these questions. They know who to turn to, even if they don't know it themselves. They're going to know who to ask to pay more attention to that, to cue into what's going on. So I would start there. I mean, just for people's knowledge in the town too, the town has purchased a referral system for mental health treatment. So I don't know if people have heard about that, but it's called Interface. It's for any student or resident within the town. And people can certainly reach out to me and get more information on that. Actually, I brought some brochures over there and I put some cards over there. But it's, you can call it and they do like a short intake over the phone and they'll connect you based on your insurance, your availability, to any type of family therapy, individual therapy, that kind of stuff. So I think it's a great resource just to know about and to call and ask questions too. Like, this is what my child is struggling with. Would there be a provider within Massachusetts that could maybe help with this? But the schools are well aware of that. Kelly and I actually went out to the pediatrician's offices all throughout Easton to give information about Wings of Hope and this. So people should be familiar to how to access help if needed. But I would try to start personally with the people that are already kind of connected with your child, friends of theirs, you know, just to kind of get a gauge of what else other people are seeing and then ask for help that way.
Awesome. Thank you.
Interface is great. We get tons of calls from them all the time.
Yep.
Only other thing I would add is that as parents to not, and I'm also a parent, as parents to not be afraid to talk to your child about it. I think there's somewhat of that still, you know, stigma that if I talk to my kid about substance use, it means they're going to go ahead and use, and that's not it. And that, you know, education also has to be at home, because some of our kids are comfortable talking to the teachers, but some would prefer to talk about it, you know, or with their coaches, but like in the house. So to not be afraid to talk about it with your child. It doesn't mean they're going to go and do it, but that to kind of have that open dialogue so that they will feel comfortable coming and talking to you, coming up with a, you know, a code text. I say this to our families all the time. Like, if your kid texts you the letter J randomly, that you're supposed to call and be like, where are you? You're supposed to be home. I don't know, kind of to help get them out of an uncomfortable situation, you know, no questions asked things, so that way they feel comfortable leaving without kind of having their friends all know what's happening. But that it is just important to have those dialogues at home too, and, you know, keep the door open to all of that.
All of that. Yeah, that's actually where I was going. You know, my work is really more that sort of before time, the, you know, delaying that use, the prevention piece. And so the most important thing I think for families that they can think about is having those conversations. Parents are actually like the #1 influence on their kids, believe it or not, no matter what. Like, even though your kid is like looking the other way and doesn't want to talk to you and you're like the cringiest person in their life, and but that kids self-report that like the disappointing their parent is like the #1 reason they don't use, and that gets reinforced like over and over again. And so it's really important for kids, I think, to hear from us about what our expectations are, and to have that high bar, and to start those conversations early, to have them often, to have them in small bites, because they don't want to talk about that stuff sometimes, like, you know, at least not with their parent, but to be just little by little chipping away at that in the car when they're like stuck and they can't get out and they don't have to look at you, or like, you know, and you're walking somewhere, you don't have to make, no eye contact, right? And I think also when you have those conversations, like Marcy was talking about, and you have them early and you start them ahead of time, it's easier to have them without the like emotion, because if the conversation hasn't happened and something happens and your kid is in a situation and now you're in it, and emotions are high and people say things, you know, like we all are guilty of saying things that we're like, ooh, but I really wish that hadn't come out of my mouth, right? Our kids do it, we do it. And so really trying to set that stage and to be clear about our expectations, to help them have exit strategies and to think through scenarios ahead of time so they can maybe rehearse stuff in their heads, because they aren't, you know, because they're kind of impulsive creatures, they're adolescents, like, and they're in, you know, developmentally they're supposed to be testing limits, and they're, you know, supposed to be figuring out where those are. So partly like we need to have some limits so that they like kind of a little bit know what they're pushing up against, but you know, really having those conversations with them, trying to keep that open, being curious, finding ways to do that. So thinking about the media they consume, what messages are they hearing, those are good places to have conversations, or to talk about a third party, like, oh, I noticed the character on this TV show that you're watching was in this situation. Like, what do you think about that? Like, that's not, that doesn't feel personal, right? So there are ways to do that. And then reinforcing those norms with kids and talking to them about like, wow, I learned most kids don't use. Does that surprise you? Like, what do you think? Where do we get these messages from? Why do most of us carry this idea that this is what kids do? Because a lot of us, carry that. The place where I go to a lot to deepen my own understanding, I love podcasts. And so I am like a huge podcast consumer, and there are lots of really great ones out there for parents, and they interview all sorts of really amazing people who are, in this field. And it's often how I figure out like, oh, I really want to read that book. I heard this great interview like on this really fun podcast. So if people like podcasts, I have a lot of fun recommendations. We also have a podcast on behalf of there are 4 communities that are all collaborating around some stuff. So Easton, Stoughton, Avon, and Norwood. And there's handouts over there. So we've been podcasting. And so if you like the smoke and fire analogy, I actually just interviewed Dr. Schuster last week, and that podcast is up on our site. And it's a great interview because of her, not because of me. And there are some other really fantastic ones in there. Some of them are with folks in your community. Some of them are with people in our other communities. Some of them are with researchers and folks from other places. So, those are great places. I also think the Wings of Hope website, Stoughton Oasis maintains a website. Like, we all post lots of really great things on our social media, places to get more information. On our websites, we maintain a lot of places where you can seek more info. And so I think those are also great ways to sort of learn about both what's happening locally, but also, so that when you hopefully are having these conversations with your kid, you're armed with the science and you can talk to them about some of these things that and so you can be that good source for them, because they're going to hear all kinds of stuff from their friends that may or may not be accurate. So awesome.
Well, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so at this time, because we have a smaller group tonight, if you have questions, I'm just going to come around. If you have your questions written out on cards, I will take them, or you could put your hand up, whatever you'd like. Okay, perfect.
Hey, got questions.
Pause for a second. Awesome, thank you. Okay. All right, so my high schooler says kids vape in the bathroom. Is that correct? Are restrooms, halls supervised? What are the caregivers at the school? Oh, consequences, sorry. Yep. I don't read a lot of cursive lately.
I guess I'll take that one since I'm the high school guy. So we can't talk about what the consequences are, right? That's kind of protected. It depends on.
Just general student handbook stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can't talk about what consequences are. I will tell you that the consequences can change depending on whether the person was a multiple offender, whether it was just nicotine, whether it was THC. There's a whole myriad of factors that will play into what that consequence will or will not be. Okay. Vaping in the bathrooms is the same as smoking in the bathrooms when we were in high school. That's kind of what I would say to that. It happens. When it's harder to catch actually than smoking, because it's just it doesn't smell like anything typically, or maybe it smells like fruit, but maybe I don't know, right? And when it gets reported, we try to figure out who it was. There's not cameras in the bathrooms, but there's cameras in the hallways, and if we can narrow down a time frame, we might be able to figure out who did it. Or people get caught in the act sometimes, as is pretty normal. It's just like when you were in high school, same deal. It happens, and when they get caught, there are consequences. That's kind of what I would say to that.
Okay.
So did that answer the question? I don't know. Yeah.
I think.
Anybody have any other?
Yeah, I was going to say,
comments
because
on
I
that?
mean, this is absolutely something that happens in like high schools and middle schools, like across the Commonwealth and the country, and the vaping in the bathroom thing comes up all the time. And I think it's one of the reasons actually why sometimes our kids think everybody's vaping, because they've had that experience where they walked in the bathroom and kids are vaping. And I've had high school and middle school kids say to me like, I'm afraid to use the bathroom because everybody's in there vaping, and I'm afraid like I might come out and and somebody's going to think it was me, and I'm not doing that, or and so I think, so a couple things happen. One, when you walk into that, just like when you walked into like a space where people are smoking, or when you used to have to walk through people in doorways smoking, it feels like everybody's doing it. So the kids' experience is like that the problem is bigger. The other thing I think with vaping, because of the way that products are, and we were talking about this before, kids who are struggling with nicotine addiction and withdrawal, which feels crappy, like to withdraw from nicotine, have the ability, unfortunately, to like kind of vape all day long, because you can conceal the products. You can use them in places that aren't bathrooms. Like I mean, if you picked up one of those things over there, and some of those are big, they're easy to conceal and they don't smell like anything. And so for kids who really need that nicotine to sort of just stay stable, like like if they're addicted to nicotine, they're using it to not withdraw. And so for me, like when kids are vaping in the bathrooms, I worry that they're struggling with an addiction, because like to me, sometimes it's like they're trying to bend the rules and they're, or somebody else was doing it and they are trying something. But a lot of times I think it's probably more related to, and the kid might not even know this, that if they don't do it, that they're going to feel really crappy. And so, I think some of what we all need to also be thinking about is how do we help that young person who may actually have a nicotine addiction and not know it.
Yeah, so just to go back, part of the consequence, especially when it comes to vaping, there is always some type of education component that goes along with that. So it's not just the kid is punished, there's an education component, because what we're trying to do is get the kids to understand the why, because if you understand the why, then maybe you can get the help you need to not be addicted and help with withdrawals and stuff. So.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it's very
Super
complicated.
complicated.
Yeah.
A good question.
Yeah, very good question. All right, so the next one. So can you talk about some of the things EMS and OA are doing at school to educate, support mental health, and being proactive? So I think with this question, we can't speak on behalf of the schools, but Chris, I don't know if you have any insight on.
So I
that.
actually don't feel super comfortable addressing that one
Yep,
because
that's
I'm not involved in that part of it. So.
Right, okay.
I can tell you that EMS has a health club because my kid's in the health club. So if you have middle school kids, there's a health club, and they talk about all sorts of different health issues, and a lot of those kids are involved in something called the 84, which is a statewide movement around nicotine and tobacco prevention. And so the kids who have been involved with that organization, that statewide organization, sometimes will send folks down to teach them about some of the products so they can educate their peers and talk to the Board of Health and sort of learn some advocacy. They get to go to the State House. It's actually a really cool initiative if you have kids who are interested in that. And also Wings of Hope has a group that meets here at the high school, and some of those middle school kids are a part of that too. So just as a parent, I know about those two things. My kid is involved in that. So I feel like I can safely speak about those two things. But I feel confident there are other things that are happening. I wouldn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can get you more information. I don't know who asked it, but offline. So if you want to, reach out to one of us after and give us your contact information, we can certainly get you more information. Okay. All right. So next one. I believe my child is secretly struggling, but they refuse to speak about it. How could I make that positive step with them to open up their struggles?
That's definitely one of you guys.
That's going to be one of you two.
Yeah.
I think letting them know that you're concerned is always the first step, but also looking at who is in their circle. Sometimes they prefer to disclose to a coach or a counselor, or the car conversations in the back seat. But when I always suggest to parents that when you are going to talk to your child about a difficult conversation, and this might sound silly, but kind of schedule a time to talk to them. And where it sounds like, I have to book a Sunday night to talk to my kid, but what you're really saying to them is, what you have to say is important to me, so I want you to come prepared, and I'm also coming prepared, instead of being like, hey, by the way, I'm really concerned you're depressed, and taking them off guard, to which they're gonna be like, what are you talking about? You're not gonna get, you're gonna get an emotional response. And if you wanna really have that conversation, just saying, I wanna have a hard conversation about my concerns and how I think you're appearing and how you're feeling, so can we talk on Sunday after dinner, just the two of us, and just to kind of give them some chance to prepare as well. I think conversations go a lot farther that way. But letting them know that if they're not going to disclose to you and you are concerned, reach out to the school, because what is the school seeing it's different? If they have a counselor, you can check in with the counselor, or letting them know if they're not comfortable talking to you, would they be willing to talk to someone else? Sometimes it's a pediatrician, sometimes we have lots of kids where that we see where either the kid or the parent doesn't want us to talk to the school because they want to keep their personal life and their school life separate, which I completely get. So just kind of offering lots of different options to them.
And I think too, like you're saying too, right? Trying to make it as easy and comfortable as conversation as possible, and it doesn't need to be a one and done conversation. So even if you approach it and it kind of doesn't go so well, or they're quiet about it, or don't want to open up, just respect where they're at, but maybe keep trying to approach it without like nagging or like coming across every day, tell me now, but just trying to find avenues of opening that door. And if they're not able to talk about it, then I would suggest, just like you're saying, is to be able to say, well, who do you trust? Who could I have you talk to? Is there somebody at the school? Is it, do you have a counselor that you can talk to at the school? Mm-hmm. What if I set up a counselor for you? Would you be willing to talk to that person? Even if it's okay, or, grandma, auntie so-and-so. Like, is there somebody, I am worried about you and I want you to be able to share it somewhere? Who would you feel safe? And if they have some autonomy over deciding that, maybe they would say, call grandma or call auntie or something like that. And then it just opens the door opens their mind up to know that talking about it is okay. It doesn't have to be with the parent. I think as parents, we want it to be us, but taking that step back a little bit to appreciate that they might feel more comfortable talking to somebody else, as long as it's somebody that you as a parent trust and feel safe with. But just to continue to offer those places, those small moments of time that they might be able to feel comfortable sharing something with somebody.
Can I add something else?
Yes.
I think it too is, I think that, and my kids are younger, but I mention this to parents of all ages, is we tend to talk about emotions when we're noticing negative ones. Mm-hmm. So if you can make talking about emotions, positive and negative, part of like the everyday, instead of the how was school question, because you're going to get fine, what was the best part of your day? What was something that frustrated you? And like everybody participates. So you're normalizing feelings, you're normalizing mental health within the household. You're going to get a lot farther than just like kind of dropping it on them. Mm-hmm. So making sure that as a family, you're touching on both the positive and the negative, but you're also inserting your own experiences in those conversations. Because then the kids who come in and say to me, well, I don't want to talk to my mom because she won't talk to me about, like, she's obviously sad, she's crying, but she's pretending she's not. So if you want them to talk, you have to kind of model that it's okay to talk about it. Yeah. Also, I'm not saying necessarily disclose everything, but, sharing something going to get a lot further.
I think that's huge for kids to see, that modeling of apologies, of certain things, right? Just certain things that we take for granted, but they're not used to maybe seeing. And so being able to be like, oh, I did have a rough day today, or something kind of sad happened. That's age appropriate for them to hear, but just modeling the emotion behind things, the normalizing behind that. And if they're not really able to talk about it, try to figure out ways that maybe, okay, like if today you don't want to, if they're younger, I would say more so, don't want to talk about it, can we draw about it? Can we create a game about it? Can you tell me in your body where you might be feeling whatever you're feeling, and if they're like my stomach, my head, my hands, whatever, and then trying to just open the other doors of like either nonverbal communication around their body, their mind, giving them different ways to communicate, I guess, that might feel more comfortable to them.
Great. So this last question, so this kind of goes right in line with what we're talking about now. So we talked about how to talk to your kid. This question is, how should I approach other parents, families who I believe are negatively impacting my child during visits? So maybe it could be a sleepover.
Right there.
This is a good one.
Save it for
great
last.
question.
Yeah.
Great question.
So maybe they're going for a sleepover. They're going to somebody else's house after school, and there's some not great behaviors happening. How would you go about approaching that situation?
I mean, I think this, my first disclaimer is that every family is going to do this differently. Mm-hmm. But your child's safety is your responsibility. So it's okay to upset another family member or to upset a friend if that's keeping your child safe. I actually work with a family right now, not an Easton family, because I don't see Easton families, because I live there. where, you know, the mom and dad had to put up very strict boundaries with the grandparents or things they couldn't do, and it wasn't received, but the parents like, this is my child. These are the boundaries. This is going to keep my kid safe. You can get on board or not. I think for teenagers, when parents approach like other families, it's always like, oh, you're embarrassing me or whatever. But the bottom line is, I'd rather my kid be safe than not safe. And having those hard conversations is, you know, again, is good modeling. Like, you're not always going to get things to be necessarily easy. But, and I would be transparent with your child if you're going to have that conversation with one of their friends' parents or whatever, that I am going to have this conversation so they know about it and they don't feel that it's behind their back. Or, you know, you can go to Susie's house, but I'm not going to allow you to sleep over, but I'm not going to embarrass you. So I'm going to call you at 10:30 and tell you that I'm angry at you because you didn't clean your room, and I'm going to pick you up. So you can go and you can bring your sleeping bag and pretend, but I'm not okay with it, so I'm going to pull you out. So just kind of having that scenario, setting it up with your child so they, and also like why you're not comfortable with it, letting them know that it's okay that Susie's parents say this, but this is not how we do things in our household.
And I think talking, when you said be transparent with your youth too, but talk to them about what they can do to safeguard with your concerns, right? Maybe they don't see the concerns, I don't know, or maybe they kind of secretly know something's not cool over there, but they really want to hang out with their friend, and that's where their friend lives. Just letting them know that you can call, you can text, I'm going to check in with you. If, you know, having that open conversation to hope that they may bring it to your attention. But I don't think there's anything wrong with personally addressing it before the sleepover, before an event, before anything, if that's the concerns that you have. And again, the other family may not receive it as well, your child may not receive it as well, but I think if you come to the conversation pretty transparent and letting them know why, what your concern is, hopefully they'll get it at some point, even if in that moment they don't. And then if that's not going well and the youth is, you know, really adamant to see certain friends or be with certain family members, you maybe try to be creative. Like, they can come here, we'll meet them at a movie theater and I'll let you guys go into the movie theater, or I'll bring you to the concert, but I'm going to pick you up. But just try to be creative so that they can still keep, if it's a healthy, at least relationship with that peer, but maybe not so much the dynamics or the family dynamics. Try to be creative of ways that they can still have that connection. But honor your safety piece, your concern for safety, I guess. So,
I think the one thing you have to be careful of too, especially with teenagers, is if you don't approach it from what they're saying from an upfront standpoint of this is what I would like you to do, this is why I would like this to happen or whatever. If you're not upfront with them and you just say no, you can't do that. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to go right to them when you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
So that's why it's very important to talk to the child and let them know why that you think this might be a problem. So
they can disagree, but at least I think
Right.
if you give that explanation, you're ahead of the game versus just the absolute no with no understanding why, because then they're going to, like you're saying,
they're just going to
push
do it,
back
yeah.
on that, and that's going to be even more of a motivating factor to go.
Well, and if
around
you
those
don't
people.
explain your why, then they're going to make up their own narrative in their head, which could go in a whole different
Right.
direction.
Yeah.
Stephanie, comments on that?
The only other thing I was just thinking about is, like, you know, maybe where it's appropriate to involve your kid in trying to solve that problem. So if you're being transparent with them about, like, I'm uncomfortable about you being in this situation, but I really would like to help you preserve the relationship that you have with your friend or whatever that is, like, maybe working with your kid to come up with some of those creative, I mean, you just came up with a whole bunch of creative solutions. And so if the kid feels like they're a part of that, that might feel better to them. I mean, I've had friends who are like, I just make my house the safe house. Like, I know that in my house, you know, there are certain things that are not allowed. You know, we're not serving alcohol. We are not, you know, allowing kids access to things they shouldn't be doing. I try to make fun snacks and, like, give kids their space, but, like, there are parameters but my door's always open and my kid can bring their friends here, and I will always be the place where they can have sleepovers and, you know, all of those things. And
I
you know,
definitely did that during the teenage years.
yeah, because then at least you know.
Yeah, you can have a little bit of eyes and ears on it all. And
Right, so the cue cards are done, but does anyone have any questions that they want to ask? Anything that comes to mind? No? Okay. All right, so I think with that, you know, we do plan on having another community panel, I believe, in the fall. with hopefully some data and some more information. So we want to invite you. We don't have a date set yet, but we will get out that information when we can. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our panelists tonight in Easton Public Schools. And I think that will close it.
Resources
Yeah.
too. We have
Oh,
lots
yes.
of good resources.
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
If you haven't,
Yep.
check out the
Yes.
that
oh,
over
hidden
there.
in plain sight.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Yep.
One of the things you're going to notice, and she brought it up earlier, was the marketing to the kids. When you look at some of those THC products over there, there's something called the Wonka bar. Well, what's Willy Wonka? That's a
Candy.
kid's thing, right? There's a Sour Patch Kid thing
Oh.
over there. They look like actual candy.
Purposeful.
And it's very purposeful. It's.
Yeah.
I mean, I predict that much like Big Tobacco was sued when I was younger, that in say 10 to 20 years they're going to be suing Big Marijuana over the same exact thing, marketing to
all these
kids.
things,
So
Yeah.
but take a look. There's some really interesting things over there.
I mean, that actually, I mean, maybe we should just say this while we're still being recorded. There are some serious safety things to also be thinking about with kids, and particularly products that look like this. Both of these are things that, these came out of Stoughton, pulled off of kids. And these are things that we see in Massachusetts. They're coming from other places. The thing that's really concerning about these products is, well, one, they look like they're super kid-friendly. They look and taste like candy. If it was not in the package, you would have no idea that these products were THC infused. So the little Sour Patch watermelons that came out of this look like Sour Patch watermelons. The Wonka bar looks like a chocolate bar. This is actually a Hershey bar inside. This is not a THC bar. But what the other thing that's important about these is when kids see products like this, they sort of, the way they think about consuming them is the way you would think about consuming a regular Hershey bar or a package the size of gummies. So I don't know about the rest of you, but if somebody hands a candy bar to me, I'm going to eat this is one serving. And this is one serving, right?
Yeah.
This is not one serving when it has THC in it. So this product is supposedly, and I'm going to take my glasses off, 15 servings. This is 15 servings of THC. So you can imagine if a kid were to consume all of it, half of it. I mean, this, like a square is a serving. Nobody eats a square of chocolate. I'm sorry. Like, if you do, like, good for you. You have a lot of self-control. But so, it's super easy to get into a really scary medical situation really quickly with these kinds of products. And so it's also really important to be having conversations with our kids, even young kids, about not taking, eating things that they don't know what they are or that are or from somebody they don't know. I mean, these are products because they're odorless. It's easy, they're portable, it's easy for kids to have them in school, unfortunately, or in other settings. And, and there are cases where somebody gives them like, hey, you want a piece of chocolate? And, there's no wrapper, there's nothing. And suddenly they're in the nurse's office and they're like, something is wrong with me, I don't know what's going on. And so I think it's really important to be talking to kids about paying attention to stuff like that. And not, and we all said we're trying to not be like, fear-mongering, and that's absolutely the last thing I want to do, but I do think it's really important. We do a lot of education with young kids around medication safety, and so it's kind of it's the precursor to this stuff. It's like medicine can look like candy. I mean, I ate a bunch of Advil when I was a kid because they look like when M&Ms used to still be tan, those little Advils look like M&Ms. So if they're out on the table and you're a kid, you're like, ooh, what is that? Or gummy vitamins or some of these things. And so like there are lots of like age-appropriate things we can also do with younger kids around like being safe around things, and like we like to share stuff, but we don't share medicine, and we don't like share food and allergies, and there are lots of reasons. But I think like from a harm reduction perspective too, it's really important for kids to understand like this is not the same thing as a Hershey bar, and if somebody is consuming this, it's not consumed in the same way you would consume a Hershey bar. And the same with like these kinds of things, like the number of puffs, this is like multiple packs of cigarettes in this one cute little device. So, I think even just like that, so the display is useful in that way, as like just sort of being familiar with the kinds of things that are out there, and that, unfortunately our kids might have more information about than we do because they live in like a different world.
The other thing to keep in mind with the edibles is there's a delayed response.
Yeah.
So it can take 15 to 30 minutes before that effect takes place. So if Johnny Jones or Sally Smith takes a gummy and they go, "Ah, that didn't do anything," and 5 minutes later they take another one, that's not doing anything. Then 5 minutes later they take another one, and the first one hits, the second one hits, and the third one hits. That's when they end up in the nurse's office with heart palpitations, thinking that, you know,
And they're
going to
hallucinating.
die or
Yeah.
whatever. So.
Yeah.
That's just something to think about. There is a delayed response with that, with the edibles.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of information about alcohol, and we sort of know the way that works in our body. But some of these high potency THC products, especially because marijuana is legal, it's like equally important to sort of understand some of that as well. Yeah.
Thank you. So we encourage you to go and check out that Hidden in Plain Sight display. You know, we're going to be here after for questions. And then we've got a table full of resources right over here. Please take, you know, whatever you would like to. And we also have pizza and drinks over there. So help yourselves. And then last but not least, on your way out, if you could just take a quick survey for us. We have the scan code right over here. We would love to get your feedback on tonight. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.